Welcome to Bitcoin Escape Plan. Bitcoin is currently on a massive uptrend, and in today's video, we're going to go over the key levels that could continue to confirm or invalidate this trend moving forward. Later on in the video, we will confirm that among the higher time frame as well, just to see an accurate picture of where the short-term and the longer-term time frames actually connect on the same conclusion. And at the end of the video, I will go over recent trade setups and how I actually am now in profit on a trade that I was in loss in for 3 weeks, which is crazy, I acknowledge. If you are new to the channel, you can check out bitcoinescapeplan.com. Every Monday, I release a newsletter that breaks down all the key levels across time frames that you can check out in your own time, separate from these YouTube videos, which I do release every Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday here on YouTube, where you can subscribe as well. So Bitcoin on the 4-hour time frame is where we always like to start off. There's a couple key things that have happened recently that are very important that we need to acknowledge before moving forward. This is the anchored VWAP, the downtrend anchored VWAP from the 126 all-time high. Super important. I'll put up the courses in the top right-hand corner of the screen so you can go and learn more about that over there. But basically this tells us the weighted price between the absolute high and now. We had an interaction with that earlier last week, I believe, that resulted in a bullish momentum. Now, this is because Trump said the ceasefire, that's what actually allowed that. But regardless, we need to interpret anytime above this is pushing us towards the middle band. Where is the middle band? The middle band is at 83.7K. Do I believe that we're going to hit 83.7K? No, I do not. But I do believe that the price will be pulled in that direction until such a time that we have confirmation that it needs to go back in the opposite direction, at which point I would imagine it will spectacularly fail back down towards the 64K Fibonacci pivot, which I will go over in the later time frame part of the video. So what we're looking for right now is this very similar to this downtrend. Is we have this downtrend line, which is just drawn linearly from the 126 all-time high. And as you can see, the price has actually managed to pump above it. So on the initial attempt, I believe this was last night, it failed, closed significantly below it. It chopped around for a while until showing strength at the 71.6K Fibonacci pivot, as well as not needing to interact with the 4-hour SMA. Objectively, you know, like that is what that is telling us, is short-term strength. Thank God for my trade's sake. And at the moment, again, we are above this trend line. Super important. It'll be a little bit more apparent when I go over the higher time frame, but just so that you are aware, while we are above that part of the trend line, all we are waiting for is to see where do we form resistance, because then we're going to, by about April 24th, April 23rd, we are going to see a very important bit of information that if the price is to the right of this red line, but below this blue line, that is going to push us down over time. If the price is above this red line and retests and stays above this blue line, then we actually do have some credence to stay higher for longer. Now, me personally, I don't really believe that is the case. I believe that we're going to chop up to somewhere around here, and then we are going to fail down and probably break that blue line and then probably head down in that direction. Now, again, we'll go over this in the higher time frame. It's just a little bit more obvious when we're looking at the weekly or the monthly chart, but what we're looking for in the short term is just the continued reaction to that trend line. Now, again, we are reacting fairly strongly to it. We are starting to see the Bollinger Band curve down though, which typically does indicate that we're losing some momentum, losing some steam, and we could see a major reversal now. Now, what I would expect at the moment, given that we are showing pretty healthy volume both on Tuesday as well as today on Friday, quite a bit of volume today on Friday, I would assume that we're going to carry this momentum into the weekend. Saturdays are historically pretty flat. Price typically doesn't move more than 1 to 1.5%, and it typically is in a range instead of like being positive or negative 1.5%. It's just kind of flat, and it ends up being about 1% over the course of the day. And then Sunday, we would expect probably more likely a continuation of whatever the trend is, which again is bullish at the moment. And we are currently above the 50% mark that I talk about all the time at 70.2K. And that's kind of what I would expect as a like a break and retest. Like if we are about to see us losing these levels once we hit the 73.8K psychological level, which this is a good time to jump into the higher time frames now. The psychological level of 73.8K is important because of this guy right here. This is March of 2024. This is just before the halving event, and it is all ETF buyers essentially from late December to about March. That's like the IBIT kind of wave of individuals buying. That's also the first time in Bitcoin's history that we hit a new all-time high that early in the halving year. Typically it is in Q4 of the halving year that we expect to see an all-time high. So very, very important. I do think that that has changed the volume metrics of Bitcoin quite a bit. And it's a big reason why we did not see as much volatility to the upside in this most recent cycle. It's why we didn't see 130, why we didn't see 150, the combination of setting new all-time highs earlier than we traditionally would, and the key psychological level of 100K just being way more important than 180, 150. Like those are not as important as 100K. 100K is more important, and therefore psychologically price didn't want to go too far from that. So what we're waiting for at the moment, as I said, is it's a little bit easier to see this on the weekly time frame, but essentially this guy right here, this is about the 50% mark of this range, which is right around 70.3, 70.4. It's kind of arbitrary, it doesn't really matter, but somewhere in there is where we would want to see the price close in order to give us some pressure towards that 76.2K pivot. And it's pretty much the same story that I've been saying for weeks now, although this is a good sign that we're starting to see this curve instead of sharply drop down. Because what that means is we're going to interact with this and probably have less pressure on it than if we were interacting with both the weekly SMA and the Fibonacci pivot at the same time. But I would still imagine what is going to happen is we're going to break that weekly SMA, and then we're going to find natural resistance, and then we're going to drop right back below it. And during this stage of the cycle, when we have interactions with the weekly SMA, we typically do not hold it for very long. Let's go take a look at what I mean. So this is 2022. 2022, we saw our drop into November, just as we have this time. And then we see a rise into December, just as we did this time, except our local high was actually in January. Then a drop down, some chop, and then a final high, in this case in March. For us, it will be April. That ends up breaking. At this time, the weekly SMA had already broken below that Fibonacci pivot. So when we broke the weekly SMA, that Fibonacci pivot actually formed as resistance instead of support. And it's pretty much the same story if we go and look at 2018 as well. We don't have Fibonacci pivots for them, but very similar. You can imagine there's a Fibonacci pivot here. There's probably another one around here, but pretty much same story that going into May, April, we had another attempt to reconnect with the weekly SMA that ultimately resulted in failure. We actually don't have any examples in history of us being in this stage of the cycle and having a bullish reclaim of the weekly SMA. Like that does not exist on the chart. If you can find it, you let me know, but that does not exist on the chart. Where in the, in the bear market year, and even there's like alarming similarities, like the war with Ukraine started like very similar time in 2022 as all this stuff with Iran is going on. The prices of oil, there's a lot of similarities that like, it's your own life. You can do whatever you want. You can say that there's no 4-year cycle or whatever, but the reality is Bitcoin fits very well within this 4-year broader economic cycle within the world, because the world has multiple cycles, like some of them are 8-year cycles, 12-year cycles, 20-year cycles. Bitcoin's reliable 4-year cycle fits on top of all of that and will just continue to suck liquidity from those other asset classes over time. which is why we want to maintain exposure to this. This is not investing advice, but why we want to maintain exposure to Bitcoin is it was designed to fit within the existing economic structure. It was not designed to supplant it. It was not designed to replace it. It was designed to fit like a square block in a square hole, of exactly what we needed for times of uncertainty. The price is going to behave in a fairly predictable way. There's a lot of very smart people who just took a short up here and who have been doing nothing, other than just waiting, possibly adding to their spot positions. But probably most smart people are not even really playing with leverage at this point because there's too much chop to be able to do it reliably. Like what I talk about at the end of this video is not normal. For me to have been sitting in loss for 3-4 weeks and to now be in profit without having to close the trade, that's crazy. Like that's not very common. It's much more common that people just lose money in these environments. Whereas once you know what you're looking for, it's not that hard to just kind of maintain, some situational awareness of what the price is doing, combine that with a little bit of historical and technical analysis. And I don't know, I feel like it's a no-brainer, but there's a reason why I make YouTube videos about it is because obviously it's not, other people need help with it. So leave me any comments down below if you have specific questions about, why Bitcoin behaves this way, and I'll give you the best answer I can. But all I can really tell you is that it's a supply and demand asset. So it's designed specifically to function the way that it does, where in times of uncertainty, it's going to be the first thing that sells off. And in times of, rapid excitement, it's just going to continue to pump, like there's no tomorrow. So what we're looking for again at the moment is we're already well above that 50% mark. So anything above about 70.3 for the close this week will be regarded as, I would say, like neutral to bullish. My broad opinion is still that we're going to see a break of the weekly SMA that ultimately results in failure. I did see that they're getting closer to passing the Clarity Act. Even that Brian Armstrong from Coinbase is like stoked to move forward with it, which doesn't make sense to me because as far as I'm aware, they're not allowed to earn yield on stablecoins, which, functionally impairs one of Coinbase's like primary draws for people to hold a large amount of cash with them. But they may be more excited to move forward with other products, like being able to have the perpetual contracts and the futures contracts is huge. Like that may actually end up becoming more of a product for Coinbase than specifically trying to have people hold their stablecoin static with them, where that's where they're really behaving like a bank instead of like an exchange. And there are differences. Obviously, there's a lot of similarities as well, but functionally, it's just going to kind of change what it means to actually be a crypto company within the space. So that I think will short term result in bullish momentum. But again, like I've been talking about this since like December's videos, like for a long time. I thought that was gonna be 96K then, but I've been pretty clear about it since like December's videos that I'm expecting a lower high to form between now and the end of April, which then is gonna be a failure of the weekly SMA that pulls us down. And we have one more attempt, I think, in June, July. And then it's the same thing. It's just going to fall off a cliff after that point. Like it's not like I delight in telling you that. That's what the chart is telling me. That's what history tells me. And I really have no reason to believe otherwise, because psychologically what is happening now is the ETF buyers are, trying to defend this price. This is one of the most periods of volume that we have is right in these prices, both from back here and here. We have a lot of people, of living, breathing human beings who have an opinion and an emotional bias towards these prices. The problem is we do not have a lot of human beings between about 72 and 86K who have strong opinions about those prices, who want to defend those prices or add during those prices. We don't have that. So what we do have is a bunch of people up here with theoretically lower conviction than yourself who are trying to decide, if we get a rise up to 80 or 84, what is preventing these individuals from taking a 5 or 10% haircut when they've been sitting in 30 or 40% loss? This is not someone who holds their own Bitcoin. This is someone who probably owns IBIT or MicroStrategy or some other derivative that is not the Bitcoin itself. Now, obviously, a good portion of that is the Bitcoin itself, but I don't think that it's a majority for people who bought up here. I will argue that it is a majority for people who bought down here. Like anyone whose cost basis is below 30K, there was no ETF when the price was that low. So that's just Bitcoin that they were buying. But as soon as we get to these levels, it gets much more complicated where it's not just somebody holding spot Bitcoin. It could be somebody holding an IBIT ETF. It could be someone manipulating one of the miners. Like there's a number of factors now that kind of muddy the information that we're actually getting from, this is the anchored volume profile. And again, if we're just looking strictly at history, what we would expect is just continued failures off of the weekly SMA. Let alone the monthly SMA. Monthly SMA, historically, we have a period of about 8 to 12 months before we have another interaction with it. Not until we break it, until we have another interaction with it, which puts us at, we are currently on month 5, which means we have another 3 to 7 months before we're even going to see an interaction with it. It is curving to the upside, which I will say is fairly novel for this time in the cycle. It's not common. You know, it already was curving down by now in 2022. It was still just continuing higher. Oh my God. It was just continuing higher in 2018, and it is worth noting Donald J. Trump was the president there. So I'm kind of expecting something like a quicker reclaim. Again, this wouldn't be until next year, but then there's going to be something that comes up next year, I think, that ends up pulling the price down again. Like I don't think that it's going to be, you know, like just off to the races next year. I really am of the opinion that if the news companies could only run one story for all of 2026, that story is how low can Bitcoin go? If the news companies could only run one story for 2027, it is, can Bitcoin get back above 100K? And if the answer is yes, and we find that out in March of 2027, then what the fuck are they going to talk about for the rest of the year? You know, like they're not going to be, you have to understand that like when an asset is this large, what moves it is narratives and headlines separate from the underlying principles. The underlying principles are why we're talking about it in the first place. If it did not have those underlying principles, then there would be no reason to talk about it. But because, you know, people are impatient, we need these little narrative spikes in order to move the price separate from, again, I've been telling you for months, at the very least since February, that I'm expecting us to rise into April. I don't care about the news. I don't care about who we are at war with or not at war with. I don't care. The price is doing exactly what I said it was going to do months ago, just by looking at the previous analysis of the chart. Now, obviously, again, it's not completely the same. We have a left translated cycle this time. We started breaking down earlier, which may just mean that we reclaim the weekly and monthly SMA earlier than we typically would. You know, we're seeing a good possibility that we're not going to break the Bollinger Band. If it continues to rise up, we may have already seen the bottom. The problem with that, I think, is that it causes less pain than the alternative. The alternative being, if price starts to break back below and this Bollinger Band starts to curve back lower instead of continuing up, that is going to cause significant pain for all of those ETF buyers. It's going to test their conviction and see how badly they actually want to stay in this asset class. If they never experience that, then we do not get a massive blow off top. And that may be reality. We may never get a massive blow off top again. It may just be slow and steady, boring, followed by occasionally we have long periods where it's just underperforming what we would expect it to, which is not what people want to hear. You know, they want to hear that their Bitcoin has gone up by 20, 30% a year, every year, compound average. You know, I know that's what Michael Saylor stands on all the time, but it's just not the reality at the moment. We have to accept that it does not behave the way that it used to behave, outside of still adhering to, you know, a rough diagnosis of a 4-year cycle, which again, in my opinion at the moment, it is still doing. You know, nothing has really changed. So unfollow all of those other creators that tell you that that the 4-year cycle is dead, and subscribe to me instead, because those people are delusional. So let's go into this trade, which again, this is insane to me. I want to be very clear with you. I deserve to lose money on this trade. I deserve to lose money on this trade. I took a short here and I panicked and flipped it to a long because I saw we were making a move towards 74 and I thought it was this move. I was wrong, obviously. I then sat in loss for literally like 3 weeks, almost a month. Getting damn close to a month that I was in loss, essentially, where I was, I don't even know what the percentage is, probably 60 or 70% down in loss at that point, maybe more. Basically, I was down by more than $200 for that entire time period. To now, I'm sitting in, I believe, $46 worth of profit. And all that I really did, I don't know where I did it the first time, but I added somewhere and had to reduce it, mostly just because of, I'm not trading with a ton of cash in that account. I only have like $1,000 in cash in that account. So I'm still fairly limited in the number of contracts that I'm actually able to trade, which is a huge part of this strategy, just being able to manage an acceptable exposure without getting pulled into overnight margin requirements that you're not going to be able to fill without the defined amount of cash. Because I'm trading 10x leverage contracts that in the overnight drop down to like 3.3x leverage or 4.2x leverage, something like that, which obviously has a pretty big difference in the amount of margin that it requires from you. So what I am looking for is, I see no reason why I should not just stay in this trade until April 23rd, April 24th. Once we have confirmation of, okay, we've hit whatever key levels we're going to hit, which for me is probably somewhere between 78 and like 84. Again, I don't know that I really expect that, but I am absolutely going to take the $200 or $300 worth of profit that I will be in at that point. The caveat being, it's entirely possible that we're about to give all of this back. That we're starting to see some, struggle of going higher. And again, we're about to hit Saturday. So it's very likely that we just kind of chop sideways and trend back down towards this trend line, which could be regarded as negative information on the chart. Again, we don't want to be below this again. We want to stay above this as long as we can, because once we drop below it, we're probably retesting the blue one. And if we break again on the blue one, that's going to pull us towards 64. And I just think if we touch 64 again, we're going lower. So what we're in right now is really like, we have this last little chance for the price to just trend as high as it can before it should trend in the opposite direction. Now, there's some possibility that, even again, despite the Clarity Act not going exactly as we would hope, we would hope that you would be able to get yield on stable coins, because that's critical for DeFi in general. To not be able to offer that is going to be crippling, I think, to a lot of DeFi projects that literally rely on yield from their stablecoins in order to have a product in the first place. So what we really need to pay attention to in the first place, in the short term, is just, how does the price react to this trend line? Does the price have to go, back down and break it before it's able to continue on? Is it able just to stay up here? Like, we are starting to see compression on the Bollinger Band, which means we will see a break to one side or the other. And it's too early to say what that side is. I need to pay close attention, because I would rather take my $47 worth of profit and get out, as opposed to watching it go back into loss again. But I'm going to be honest with you, even if I lose $30 on this trade, I'm still counting that as a win, because I deserve to lose all of my money on this trade. Like, I had a position where I objectively would have been 70 to 130% in profit had I just stuck to the plan. And currently, the plan would be a short based on these local breaks of the Bollinger Band. However, I am leaning towards, as I said, my broader time frame analysis is that between now and April 24th, I would expect the price is going to trend higher until we come against an immovable object, in this case being either the 76.2K Fibonacci pivot or the weekly SMA. Now, obviously, all of that breaks if we're able to like consistently close above the weekly SMA, but I think it's more likely that this is going to curve and flatten than it is going to rise again. Let's see if we have any evidence for the weekly SMA rising again during this time of year. Not there in 2022. It's going down the whole time. It doesn't even really flatten that whole time. Let's see for 2018. Same thing, just flattens that whole time. You know, there might be a couple times where it was regarded as, or sorry, it does not flatten. There's short periods of time where it curves inward a little bit, but that ends up being regarded just as continued downside after that. And I believe it's the same for 2014 as well. 2014, there's a little bit longer of a period of time where we are consolidating before another drop, but it's pretty much the same story. So every time we interact with the weekly SMA, it ends up resulting in a failure when we are in this part of the cycle. And an important caveat with the Clarity Act and the Genius Act, the actual liquidity from those coins is not going to fully come into effect until the banks are ready with their stablecoin products and they are actively pumping them. And that's not the case yet. You know, they haven't even announced their partnerships, which blockchains they're going to be developing them on. I believe I saw something about a Solana, Wells Fargo one. Like, it's still super early, where we're not going to see the volume that we need or that people are expecting in order to produce the desired result, which is higher highs. You know, it's much more likely in this instance that we're just going to continue to see chop. That's kind of why I'm waiting for that April 23rd, April 24th, because once we get to that time period, it's going to be more obvious of, okay, are we sitting in, now it's time to short, or is it clear, you know, that we're forming support at key levels and are ready to continue to go higher? You know, like if we start closing multiple weeks above 80K, then I have to acknowledge that I'm wrong, you know, and that there is a possibility that we just continue to go higher. We are starting to break above the Bollinger Band right now. Super important. So I am going to end the video now and just take a look at that just to manage my trade. But that's something I will go over in Sunday's video, as well as Monday's video and the newsletter. So again, make sure you are subscribed to get those updates. But just in general, I would expect higher until, like I said, April 23rd, April 24th, which should be right around when that ceasefire is over. And then I would imagine that the price is going to react negatively to that and start heading down again. And that's pretty much it. Nothing more complicated than that. Let me know if you have any comments, questions, or concerns. I'll talk to you on Sunday.